All right, let's talk about how a few handwritten words on a form, just a little scribble, could explode into a $137,000 medical bill and a huge federal court case. This is a powerful and honestly a kind of scary story about the gambles people take inside our healthcare system. So let me put you right in the middle of this. Imagine this scenario. Your newborn baby is very, very sick with a serious heart condition. You know the bills are going to be huge. Now, you have a pretty good health plan from your job, it's guaranteed. But you hear that a government program, Medicaid, might cover everything for free. What's the move? It's a tough choice between a sure thing that costs you money and a free option that seems almost too good to be true. And this is the sentence that kicked the whole thing off. Just a few words scribbled right there on an insurance form. And you've got to understand, this wasn't some accident or a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate choice, an instruction that triggered a massive financial and legal chain reaction and ultimately left a children's hospital holding the bag for over $137,000. So our story really starts with a father. He's a college-educated guy, and he's facing this impossible situation with his son, who was born with serious heart defects. He saw two paths: the private insurance he got through work, or the public system, the government option. And he decided to roll the dice. Okay, so first you have David G. Miller, the dad. He's got a job with a solid health plan. It's what's called an ERISA plan, which just means it's a private plan regulated by federal law. Then you have his son, whose medical needs were, from day one, going to be off the charts. And right in the middle of it all is this massive choice. Do we stick with the guaranteed but kind of pricey private plan, or do we go for what looks like free, all-inclusive government care? Now, here's where it gets really interesting. You have to understand the info the Millers were working with. According to what came out in court, they talked to people at Medicaid and the Social Security Administration, and they were allegedly told that Medicaid is the payer of last resort. Basically, it only pays up if there's absolutely no other insurance. So, to the Millers, this sounded like a clear signal. If you want the free care, you have to drop the private plan. And listen, let's be super clear. This was a conscious, deliberate move. Mr. Miller himself said so later in a sworn legal statement. He said, "I intentionally and voluntarily relinquished my right to put his son on the plan. He knew he could have done it, but he chose not to because he genuinely believed he was making the smartest financial decision for his family. He thought he'd found a loophole." All right, so here's where that carefully calculated plan just completely falls apart. And it happens fast. The family made their choice. They went with the government option, but they were about to discover that the space between those two systems, well, it was a financial black hole. This timeline is just brutal. Look at how tight this is. On March 31st, the very last day he could make a change, Mr. Miller scratches his son's name off the form. The very next day, April 1st, that private plan kicks in without his son on it. And just 9 days after that, the baby has a medical emergency and is rushed to the hospital. The timing is just wow. And boom, that's the bill. For just a 2-week hospital stay, the charges racked up to almost $138,000, an absolutely massive number with suddenly no one to pay it. But here's the thing. At first, it actually looked like the gamble worked. The hospital sent the bill to Medicaid, and Medicaid paid it. Well, not the full amount, but they paid a discounted rate of about $76,000. For a little while there, it seemed like the system was working exactly the way the Millers had hoped it would. But then came the twist. Only 2 months later, the Social Security Administration completely reversed their decision. All of a sudden, they decided the child was no longer eligible for benefits, and they terminated his Medicaid coverage. Just like that, the safety net the family thought they had, it was gone. And this created what you could call a coverage ghost town. Think about it. The kid wasn't on the private plan for that April hospital stay because his dad had waived it, and now the government was saying he wasn't really on Medicaid either. He was in a coverage no man's land, completely uninsured for that $137,000 bill. So the hospital is in a tough spot here. And they make a really gutsy strategic move. They figured here, okay, the Medicaid money is no good, but maybe, just maybe, we can go after that private plan the father opted out of. So they do something wild. They actually give the $76,000 back to Medicaid. This clears the way for them to sue the private insurer for the full, non-discounted price tag. And that is how we end up in a federal courtroom. The hospital sues the dad's insurance plan, which sets up this really fascinating legal fight. It's basically a father's personal choice going head-to-head with this bigger idea of public policy. The hospital's argument was pretty clever. They basically said, look, it should be against public policy for someone to intentionally drop private coverage just to push the cost onto taxpayers through Medicaid. And since Medicaid is supposed to be the payer of last resort, the private plan should be on the hook. The insurance company's defense? Way simpler. They just said, hey, an insurance plan is a contract. The father intentionally took his son off the contract. He's not on it. End of story. So this case keeps climbing the legal ladder, all the way up to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the judges there had to answer the big question. Does a simple handwritten note on a form actually hold up when we're talking about this much money? And the court's answer was incredibly clear. They said, and this is a quote, that it's never been their job to force a private insurance company to check if an employee's choices line up with Medicaid law. They basically said, look, we are not the Medicaid police. It's not the insurance company's responsibility to investigate why an employee is doing what they're doing. And that was the whole key right there. The court focused entirely on the job of the plan administrator, the person at the company handling the paperwork. Her job was simply to follow the instructions on the form. Mr. Miller wrote, take off, so she took him off. The court said she did her job perfectly by just honoring that direct, clear, written request. So, with the hospital out a huge sum of money and the family stuck right in the middle, the court was ready to hand down its final ruling. And the verdict was a slam dunk for the insurance plan. The decision was that the father's waiver, that little scribble, was totally legal, it was knowing, it was voluntary, and it was his choice to make. And because of that, the private insurance plan owed nothing. The $137,000 scribble held up in court. But the story has one last little ironic twist. After this huge legal war over $137,000, the hospital and the insurer then started fighting over who had to pay a measly $1,000 fee for the mediation that failed earlier, and the court had to make another ruling. They drew a very fine line, saying that a mediator works for the two parties trying to make a deal, not for the court itself. Because of that, the fee wasn't a formal court cost. So, in a funny way, the hospital lost the $137,000 war, but they technically won this tiny $1,000 battle over legal fees. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? First, and this is huge, when you voluntarily sign something or cross your name off a form, the courts take that very, very seriously. It's a binding legal action. Second, this whole story is just a massive warning sign that choosing temporary government help over a guaranteed private plan is a huge financial risk. And finally, when it comes to these private insurance contracts, the courts are going to enforce the terms as they are written, even if the result feels really harsh. You know, this whole thing leaves us with a really tough question to think about. This father thought he found a smart loophole, a way to play the system to save his family a ton of money. But instead, that one decision created a crushing debt that neither the government nor a private company was willing to pay. It really makes you ask, when you're dealing with systems this complicated, is trying to be clever ever worth the risk of what happens if you get it wrong?